you go. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people, depending on where you are watching us from in the world. And I just am really excited about this conversation today because I feel this will hit home for a lot of people. It is very, very close to my heart to have this conversation with Jason. And I actually found Jason on LinkedIn. We just had a chat about this quickly in a pre-chat, and I commented on something that he posted because his story really stood out for me. And there are so many elements to that, which I won't take away just as yet. Before I do that, I just want to say a very warm welcome. And would you do us the honor to introduce yourself to our audience, please? Hi, Jason.
Hello, Marie. I'm so happy to be here and really glad we crossed paths on LinkedIn. So, yeah, my name is
Yeah.
Jason MacKenzie. I am a husband, father, business owner, and I do a lot of writing and speaking and content creation around grief.
Yeah. Your story around grief is, I almost want to use the word double touching. It really went under my skin, I have to say. And having worked with thousands of people in this space, to say your story truly stood out for me, that means a lot. I was so blown away by how you made your choices around grief, how you worked through it, and your mindset around it. I know that we are going to unpack a lot about this today, but is it okay for you to share your story so our audience knows why this is so intense and what happened in your life? And there is a beautiful happy ending to that too. So I want to give that away, a little bit of a
Yeah,
cliffhanger here.
yeah, I know. I'd be happy to do that. I'd be happy to do that.
Hmm,
So, I mean, I'll go back. I'll tell it quickly, and if there's anything you want me to go into further
absolutely.
detail in about, just ask. But so I was married, and we had two wonderful women who was a police officer. We had two young daughters, and my wife had dealt with some mental health issues throughout her life,
Mm,
like an eating disorder and stuff. And but
mm,
on the job of being a cop, you obviously suffer. There's every single first responder goes through an immense amount of trauma on the job, and I think at
yeah.
her childhood trauma and some of the trauma on the job accumulated to the point where after the birth of our second daughter, her mental health just completely fell apart. And for the next 5 years, she was, I mean, we went from homeless shelters to rehab to locked psych wards to electroshock therapy to near bankruptcy to just, I mean, it
Wow.
was a nightmare of watching, I mean, inevitably, watching my wife die and not being able to do a single thing to stop it. She tried every single thing that there was to do. And it's
Mm,
just things got darker and darker. And ultimately in 2010, she took her own life. She just could not take the pain anymore, the inconsolable
mm,
mental anguish. And I've often said to people, sometimes people will ask me if I was ever upset with her. And I think there
mm,
was, for sure, I had a few moments afterwards of, you know, being upset with her. But I often think that if I was in her situation, I don't think I would have made it. I don't think I would have made it as long as she did.
yeah.
That's how intense her pain was. And so when she died, I didn't know anything about grief. I mean, I had two young daughters
How
who
old
just
were
lost
they
their
at the
mother. So
time?
they were 6 and 5, six and
Mm,
five. And honestly, I don't even know where I got this idea, but I remember thinking that grief is something weak people did, while the strong people took
yeah.
care of the things that needed to be taken care of because the world does not
Yeah.
stop turning because you've lost
Yeah.
somebody, right? And so,
And that is such a misconception. It is actually quite widespread, and in particular, and I know we said we're going to talk about that in a little while as well, but I just want to say that now. In particular for men, it's so often that, you have to be strong. It is that, to me, that's such a divine masculine
mm,
trait. You have to be strong, you have to hold it together, you have to carry this. Because after my husband passed, I stepped into that divine masculine, the protector, the provider. I have to be there, I have to hold it. Um, so that allowing the grief was seen as weakness. Like, even I have to admit, for me at that stage, I had never noticed that until we just had this conversation.
mm,
I felt like I couldn't allow myself to be weak. I needed to be there for the boys.
yeah,
It's interesting.
absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it? And so,
Mm,
However, during my wife's mental health issues and afterwards, I developed, well, during her mental health issues, I mean, I developed a huge drinking problem, because I
Mm.
had no, I mean, it was just incredibly difficult, and I had
Yeah.
no vocabulary or, emotional intelligence to try to
Mm.
understand what was happening to me. So without it really being a conscious choice, I mean, I suppose every choice is conscious, but I mean,
Mm.
I ended up just drinking, trying to drink the pain away.
Mm.
And then so after Cindy passed away, I mean, I ended up getting remarried, but I drank heavily for 4.5 years after that.
Yeah.
And ultimately I quit about 11 years ago. And it wasn't until I stopped drinking, maybe about 6 months later, that I
Hmm.
actually started to feel all these really intense emotions about Cindy, my first wife. And I was
Yeah.
talking to Tanya, my current wife, and I said, like, I was writing about her. I was going to visit her grave more often. I remember asking
Mm.
my wife now, like, I don't know what's happening to me. Like, I feel like I'm going crazy. And she goes, "You're grieving, you idiot." Basically,
Oh.
like,
Yeah.
I mean, you've given
Yeah.
because I had finally given myself the space without
Yeah.
alcohol to let
Without
this
numbing the
natural
emotion.
process.
Yeah.
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 And it was an incredibly powerful experience, but it happened 5 years after she died. Like there's
Yeah.
you can't run from it, right? So, and
Yeah.
the process of grieving, it really helped me see, and healing it really helped me look at that whole experience in a different light, because I
Hmm.
was really in a victim type of mindset, and it allowed me to
Hmm.
start thinking about it differently and realizing that yeah, there was definitely some tragic elements to it, but it was also like a crucible experience that led to me
Hmm.
uh, really all changing the trajectory of my life for the better, and being able
Yeah.
to help people in different ways and all this stuff. And
Yeah.
and so and then things were going well, I suppose. And then 2 years ago, so 13 years after my wife died, our daughter Chloe died at 19 years old. Now, She, her mother's suicide shattered her soul. I mean, she was never able to recover from that. Like, I
Is
mean, the
Chloe
loss
the
of,
older one or the younger
yeah,
one? The
yeah,
older
Chloe's the
one.
older. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, she'd be 21 today. And,
Not
so,
today.
oh, not today. I mean, like, she'd be 21 now.
Oh, okay. I,
So,
I
yeah,
just thought I was doing that on her
yeah.
birthday. I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
But, but so by the end of, like, Chloe was living on her own, but her life had become completely unmanageable. And so her mental health, it just was very, very, she was dealing with what seemed to be the same issues as her mom, and was not ready to
Yeah.
get help and all of that. And so, the way she died, she was drinking and driving, and she got into a terrible head-on collision, and she almost killed four other people. Just
Wow.
a absolutely devastating way to everybody else survived except for her. She wasn't wearing her seatbelt, but she, yeah. And so, you know, what was then the grief journey begins anew. And in a way, what's interesting is, I guess, is that where I had really healed from my wife's death, but what's so interesting about the experience of Chloe's death, it's by far the most painful experience I've ever, like, nothing else even comes close. That Cindy's death, like, it's been nightmarish at times. But what made it even more complicated was, even though I had healed from Cindy's death, Chloe's death, it almost reopened some of these wounds because
Yeah.
Chloe's death was so inextricably linked with Cindy's death. Like,
Yeah.
one was a very causal factor in the other. So yeah, it's been about 2 years, 2 year, 24 months maybe. And yeah, I'll stop the monologue there.
Far out. Yeah. First of all, I just want to thank you for sharing this here and also for showing up to unpack this together because you and I had a bit of a conversation before we went live, and I went into what are you open to unpack and what not because I feel that your story is so, as I said, not just deeply touching, but also really inspiring how you went from this victimhood behavior to, we've got a choice here. And you did want to stop drinking. You did want to show up. You did choose to remarry. You did choose to um, look at your wife's death in more detail when these emotions surfaced for you. I'd also like to mention the book that you have written at this stage because you did write your first book was about. Can you share
Mhm.
a bit about that?
Yeah, so the first book is called The Dadly Book of Open, and it's about how being more vulnerable makes you a stronger, wiser, and more courageous father. So in the journey of after stopping drinking, I started just talking more openly about what that experience was like, and kind of dropping the mask and realizing, if I
Yeah.
struggled with this, there must be tons of other people that struggle with this. I mean, when you're struggling with something, of course, it's the most lonely experience in the world, even though you're surrounded by other people who are struggling with either the exact same thing or something else.
Yeah.
And so what I learned though is, we're always surrounded by people just waiting for somebody else to go first, just to
Mm.
be themselves, to share a
Yes.
little more of themselves. And so
Yeah.
that's basically the premise behind the book.
Mm. I love that you say that, because how often do we sit in a sharing circle, or even at the end of a meeting for, open-ended questions, and like it's this awkward silence, and then one person talks, and then it's all of a sudden it turns into this endless, like all of a sudden everybody's got a question. And I think, as you said, it sometimes just takes that one person to speak up or to stand up and say something, for that wave to come in where everybody feels allowed to share as well, or where everybody feels allowed to grieve or to be vulnerable. And um, so we also talk about, you and I, Jason, about this idea of men and women grieving differently.
Mhm.
What is your stand on that? Because I feel there is a myth around it. I feel there's also some truth to it, but yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
So that's a really interesting question, because I think that there are some definite differences, and I
Mm,
think there's some things that are probably missed too. Like, so if you look at if you look at cultures around the world, I read this
mm,
in a book called How Men Heal, I think, and it was from a male psychologist or
mm,
psychotherapist, and one of the things he got very interested in, why, like, talk therapy, for example,
mm,
often doesn't seem to work for men as well as it does for women. And anyways, as you look at cultures around the world, what often happens is that space is created for women to, come together and talk about things. And what often is done with men is it's to go do a thing, to take an action, to build
yeah.
something, to honor the person, but
Mm,
to do an action oriented, and then have, talking in the context of doing that thing. But many cultures around the world get the men out doing something
mm,
physical in community, as part of their healing. So I do think there are some differences generally that way, but I also think that one of the things we were talking about before we came on was, like, the idea that when a mother loses a child, like, it is a uniquely painful experience, because she carried that person, and I'm sure that is a huge factor. I mean, no
mm,
doubt. But I also think grief is such a uniquely
yeah.
personal experience, and I think that there's so many variables that contribute to the relationship you had with the person that you've lost, but also the process afterwards. And so, like, if I look at
Yeah.
myself, I look at these two girls and I think, well, I was, a single during my first wife Cindy's mental health issues. I mean, functionally, I was a single dad, and then I was
Mm,
a single dad. And
mhm.
then, as my daughters are growing, I'm the sole remaining, even though I remarried, I'm the sole remaining biological parent.
Yeah.
And and then Chloe dies, and there's such a connection to Cindy's death, and, like, so there's all of these factors that
So
contribute
many
to,
layers. Yeah.
yeah, to the totality of the
Mm,
experience, that
yeah.
it's so individual.
Yeah. How, if you don't mind me asking, and I know that is a personal story, so you don't need to
Mm.
go into detail at all, but how is your younger daughter going and coping today?
You know, yeah, what I'll say is I try not to share her too many details of her story, because that's hers to tell. But what I'll say
Yeah.
is, she's doing all the things, um, and so this is another thing that I think is very powerful, as it contribute, like, as it relates to our grieving experience, is that if you look at
Mm,
me as so if you look at, you look at her, or someone her age, so she's 20, so she was
mhm,
17 when her sister died, just about to turn 18.
mm,
There's no one in the world more self-centered than a teenager that age, right?
mm.
So when at that age, when they're grieving, like, obviously they're aware that like, their parents are grieving too, but they're
Yeah.
so focused on their own grief, where as a parent, you're you're equally, probably even more focused on the grief that your kids are
Yeah.
experiencing, as
Yeah.
well as trying to, like, navigate your own. And it's very,
Yeah.
like, seeing the kids left behind, seeing them in so much pain over
Mhm.
like, I mean, it just adds to the pain of an already
Yeah.
intolerable experience, you know?
Yeah. I find that such an important point that you mentioned that, Jason, because I have often shared this before, so I'm going to keep this super sweet and short. I shouldn't even use the word sweet. It was not sweet at all, but yeah, short and sweet, what I wanted to say. So it took me about 3 weeks after Rob died that I had this absolute breakdown. And it literally turned into me falling apart, primal screaming, whacking kitchen cupboards. It was a full on out of body experience. I had no control over what was happening anymore. And it was because I had only paid attention to my children and everyone around me and not my
Mhm.
own needs. So that I was just a breaking point, literally. I just fell apart and had to rebuild myself from there. And that to me, I always refer to these as my two darkest points in the entire journey. The one was not even so much hearing it, which was horrible enough, but having to share it with the boys. That
Mhm.
was my deepest moment, to have to tell them their dad had passed away.
Mhm.
And then my breakdown moment where I'm like, I don't ever want to go back there.
Mhm.
Are you okay to share yours? What your deepest point was where you're like, I don't want to go back there. I need to rebuild myself. I need to get out of here. Or the I need to
Uh,
stop drinking moment. I'm not sure where that happened for you.
yeah, well, I mean, so it's interesting. I think my so there's a couple that come to mind. One is I think that the moment I stopped drinking. So, you know, I was. It is amazing how how there's when you are in pain or trying to
Mm,
avoid pain, there's
mm,
infinite ways to avoid it, and they're all bad.
yeah.
They all make it worse in the long run somehow. So
Mm,
the only path forward is to actually face it and experience it, but
mm,
which is really difficult. But yeah, I mean, I knew at this point. I mean, I was barely clinging on to my own rationalizations about drinking. My wife was starting to really put pressure. I mean, like loving pressure, understandable
mhm.
pressure on me to say,
Yeah.
"Hey, you're better than this," and
Mm,
this isn't going to be my life. Like, I love you, and I'm not ready to divorce you or anything like that. But like, this is not going
mm,
to be my life. And so,
yeah.
and in that moment, I think one of my darkest moments was I did not know what I was going to choose because I didn't think I could stop. And so
Mm,
what ended up happening was my daughter, my 20-year-old, she was 9 at the time, and I ended up really disappointing her. I was, going to tell her I was told her I was going to take her on daddy-daughter date, and I
mm,
just got completely hammered. And so she was very disappointed in me, and that was really like a very low point.
mm.
Interestingly, I had this for some reason had this like total moment of clarity afterwards, and just have never had any
Wow.
urge to drink again. So I don't know
Yeah.
why that is. I mean, but
That's
I
beautiful
think
though.
yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
very thankful. And I think
Yeah.
after Chloe died, I mean, I, so I had stopped smoking pot like a couple of years before Chloe died, and
Mm,
I made it about 4 months, I want to say, after Chloe died, and I was having this massive anxiety attack. Or maybe it was about 5 or 6 months actually. I was having this massive anxiety attack, and I said,
mm,
screw it, I'm going to go to the store and buy a joint, and I went on a multi-month like pot. I'm gonna say bender because it wasn't all day or anything, but like every night I was
mm.
getting stoned,
Yeah.
and and I had moments where I thought I was absolutely losing my mind. Like it was I've never experienced that before, and I ended up stopping, thank God. And
Hmm.
it's funny when I think about it because I think like it took me 5 years after Cindy died to stop drinking, and with Chloe it was 4 months of smoking pot. So yeah,
Mm.
you know what? I'll take that as an improvement.
Absolutely.
But
I would
but
say
yeah,
so too.
but I had points there where I was like the way I guess just the grief I was experiencing, the intensity of the emotions, and the way the pot because I had smoked lots of pot before and never experienced this, but I thought I was at losing my mind, and it was
Mm,
very scary. It was because I have so much more empathy for people who are dealing with like real mental health issues because I've never felt like I was not in control of even when I was drinking. I mean, I didn't feel like I was losing my grip on reality. I had some moments where
mm.
I felt like that was happening to me, and it was incredibly frightening.
Yeah. Was there ever a moment when you just said that where you could understand Cindy a lot more, what she was going through and how that would have felt for her?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean,
Mm,
her, I have never seen, I mean, living with it every day, I had a very, it was very difficult. But I mean, it was such a eye-opening experience into the level of emotional pain that someone is like
Mm.
somebody's capable of experiencing. I mean, well, I
Yeah.
was a lot younger then, and I thought, I didn't see, I thought depression was just, come on, pull yourself up by the bootstraps type thing. But
Yeah, sort of the
it's,
feeling depressed, but not the actual clinical depression, or, the
oh,
differences are so, yeah,
oh my God, it's
vast.
inconsolable mental and
Mm.
physical anguish. It's
Mm.
so yeah, I don't think the me like feeling like I was losing my mind. I already had, I think, a tremendous amount of empathy for, what Cindy experienced, but to actually, maybe to your point, I mean, to be able to actually kind of experience it,
Mm.
probably now that I hadn't really thought about it like that, but probably that does give me some more insight into maybe what she was experiencing.
I just sometimes wonder, and I don't know if there is an answer to that or not, but when I listen to that, that just came up for me. I just sometimes wonder how our subconscious really tries to keep us safe. And in a very bizarre way, I just thought, if that was a way of your subconscious to try to get closer to understanding what that was,
Mm.
because we sort of go into the space of wanting to understand, but this is nothing that happens on a conscious level. So I feel sometimes not trying to hand you any excuses because you don't need them, but I just thought, if that might have played an element in some sort of way.
Yeah,
But yeah.
that's interesting. Well, what one thing that I think is that I have found out recently actually is,
Mm.
and I mean, I've done a lot of like personal development work and read
Mm.
lots of books and all that stuff to, talk to therapists. And I literally
Yeah.
just realized a few months ago that basically from probably, sometime before Cindy died till now, that I
Mhm.
am constantly in a state of hypervigilance, like
Mm.
prepared to face an
Everything.
emotional threat. Yeah,
Yeah.
like I mean,
Yeah.
like a painful memory, like
Yeah.
grief, like all these things, and
Yeah.
like, and it's not hypervigilance. Like there's a spectrum. Like I'm not like a police
Yeah.
officer
No,
who
no,
will
I
only sit with
understand.
her, but
Mm.
it was a powerful realization to think that, man, that
Mm.
that I did that is that, and I've just thought of that because thinking about like protecting yourself, your subconscious protecting yourself, like that's
Mm.
exactly what it's like, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I also want to ask you that, and as I said before, if anything ever gets too personal, then please, by all means,
Mhm.
we can leave that question. But when you say, "Oh, this," you only ever want to protect yourself. Like we all know that part. Everybody who's dabbled a little bit in self development knows that fact. Whatever we do, it is your mind trying to keep you safe most of the time. So, um, thinking about you and Tanya met quite early on after Cindy
Mhm.
passed away.
Mhm.
How did you deal with the fact that you were now opening yourself up to a new relationship? Or did you stay quite closed off at first? And how did Tanya help you with that? I know they're like, it's a threefold question sort of thing, but I'd really like to unpack that a little bit because we don't talk about this sort of dating after loss enough and
Mm.
how to actually open up to a new relationship. And I recently wanted to bring that topic in, and I didn't even think about that it would happen here today. But I think it's a really important topic to talk about um, because I know for a fact, like for me, it's been almost 7 years that Rob passed away, and I have dated and I have broken up. And every time when there's just a glimmer of there could be a potential new relationship, I can feel
Mhm.
fears coming up. And I
Mhm.
always say when I talk to people, like even my clients who are in a similar position or talk about this topic, that there's only a certain amount of healing that you can do on your own. There will be new layers coming up once you're in a new relationship, once you do go past that fear step and allow yourself to open your heart up to a new relationship. Do you mind sharing as much as you like about this process,
Of
how
course.
that was for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think initially I didn't really have any trepidation about meeting somebody new because
Mm-hmm.
I ascribed the problems in like my first marriage to mental health issues. So, it's
Mm.
not like I think it might have been different if I had, been betrayed in some way.
Mm.
But I just thought that no, Cindy was a wonderful human being who was
Mm,
destroyed by trauma and like, and so
yeah.
I didn't necessarily think that was going to happen again,
Hmm.
so I didn't have any
Yeah.
fear that way. But what I will say is, I think in a second relationship, I think, like a second marriage or second
Yeah.
relationship after our first one after loss, let's say, I think it took me, I was a very loving, doting. I mean, even though I was drinking, like I was a very attentive person. Like I wasn't like an angry drunk or anything. But
Mm,
having said that, um, you can only love someone to the point, like to the level that you can love your own self. And so if I'm doing something to myself, like drinking, that I'm secretly hating and hating
mm,
myself for it, but I will never admit that out loud
yeah.
because it's too emotionally risky.
Yeah.
Then if
Yeah.
I'm in that state, I'm only capable of loving to a certain depth, you know
Yeah.
and so I didn't see that at the time, and because I
Mm,
felt like I loved Tanya very much. But as times have passed and I have grown, and we have supported each other, then and I get older and hopefully a little bit wiser, my conception of what love can even be
mm,
is much different than it was 10 years ago, so.
yeah.
But I do think it definitely was an ongoing process of opening up, but I had to open up to myself first in a
Mm,
way before I could
yeah.
fully open up to Tanya.
I just want to say, Tanya sounds like a really remarkable woman. I'd love to hear a little bit more about her. How did she support you in this? What is your perspective on what her support
Hmm.
was to allow you to grow to the man to love her even more and deeper?
Yes, well, I will tell you, she's going on a bucket list trip to Australia in September for 3 months, and she's going with my
Tell her
daughter.
to meet
So,
me.
yeah, yeah, absolutely,
I'd
absolutely,
love to meet her.
yeah. No, I mean, she's, I think a couple things. Like one is so if I look at the grieving process with Cindy, I mean, I
Mm,
think what she did was she didn't actually bug me too much about drinking, but what she did was she was modeling a continual evolution in herself. Like, so she was
mm,
building, we moved to this new town, she's building community, she's involved with the kids' school, she's growing, she's
mm,
taking all these different classes, and I am stagnant. And I can see this. Like, I can
mm,
look at this and I can see that my wife is evolving and I'm like this same person, and that if our trajectories continue, there's going to be a bridge that might be too far. So that was, I mean, I think
mm.
she modeled the kind of person, she just showed me the kind of person she was, and she inspired me. But
I
the
love
second
that.
thing was she was very clear,
Mm,
about, um, again, I know I love you, and but you need to understand this is not going to be my life. Right. And so,
yeah.
and I knew she meant it,
Yeah.
So I think that was part of it too. And, when I think back to that time, and I think of all the fear I had about, admitting I needed help. And I just look
Mm,
now, and it's amazing how I can see, look in hindsight, I can see that her hand and heart were extended to me, uh,
yeah.
all the time, but I couldn't see it at the time. I just felt fear and, like threatened. Now, what I'll say with
Mm,
Chloe is been very interesting with Chloe is that you have to like we have a very different relationship, like with like both of us, between Chloe and myself. I mean, Tanya was her full-time mom, but a stepmother nonetheless. And so,
mhm,
it's just a very different relationship. And so the grief is very individual anyway. But if you look
mm,
at this, it's like, me having lost a biological kid, and then her having lost a stepchild, but it's not the
mhm.
same thing, and so
Yeah.
so I think so what I'll say is I think this is actually one of the most important moments of my life, is that when we found out Chloe died, we found out at about 8 o'clock at night, and it was in February, and our daughter, was up like 4 hours north. I live in Canada, so it's, snowy. So she
Mm,
lived 4 hours north. Or she was at a school trip, rather, like a couple nights away,
mhm.
and 4 hours north. And so we had to get up, like we had to drive up there before she found out in the middle of winter, obviously, like, and tell her before she found out on social media the next day.
Oh,
So
wow.
I mean, having to your point, having to tell this young woman, that her mother was dead and that their sister was dead is, I mean, just horrific.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that Tanya said to me on the way up there is, she said, we need to commit to each other right now that we are only going to grow stronger through this, because this is the kind of thing that destroys relationships,
Yeah,
and we need to make sure that that we have a different story to tell, basically. And
yeah,
I have thought about that moment so many times, because when you're grieving and you're deep in grief, like
mm,
the desire to isolate yourself or
yeah,
to take out your uncomfortable emotions on the people closest to you, all that
yeah,
stuff, it's so overwhelming at times. And
mm,
but just having that anchor point of like that commitment that we make to each other has been
yeah.
really important.
That's incredible. I really love that she said that to you. That is
Me
wisdom
too.
right there. And
Mm.
yeah, it just shows what an amazing woman she is. I really would love to meet her if she comes past Sydney. We need
Yeah.
to arrange that. Um, I'm just absolutely overwhelmed in the most beautiful way, like by your story and what you guys have gone through together. And I didn't even ask you, did Tanya bring children into your relationship?
Nope.
No.
No. So
So
she, to her everlasting credit, I mean, she saw that this little family unit could really benefit from, a loving mother figure, let's say, and stepped into a very complex situation, a lot of
wow, yeah,
trauma and hurt,
lots of layers.
and she gave her full, everything to it.
Yeah. Oh, Jason, I really want to thank you so much for everything that you've shared. But before we go, I know that you are in a process of writing another book. Can you share a
Hmm.
little bit about that? Let's give it a sneak peek.
Yes. Yeah. So as I said before, I didn't know anything about grief
Mm,
when my wife passed away, and so I'm really just passionate about writing for men, uh, men who are grieving and the people who love them. And so the book is
yeah,
called, I think it's going to be called, the working title is Man Down, a no BS guide to
mm,
navigating life's hardest things.
yeah,
But it really, what I want is, sort of my avatar that I always try to write for is, I try to imagine a truck driver at a truck stop who's never read any kind of personal development book or anything like that,
yeah.
being able to pick up this book and really get something valuable out of it. So I'm trying to write it as impactfully and simply and as approachable language as possible. And but yeah, the idea is just to give men, hopefully give men a better understanding about what grief is,
Mm,
what the experience of it can be like, but also some tools to just help navigate it in a way where
yeah,
sometimes, even at the very least, to navigate it in a way where you don't make a bad situation even worse than it already is.
yeah,
So
absolutely. I think it's something that we definitely need a lot more of. I have talked with a few different men on this podcast and even behind the scenes about the fact that there is not enough out there for men in grief.
mhm.
And to make this really specific, I understand it comes back to the question that we had before, do men and women grieve differently? But coming from a man who's gone through it, I think it will be such a treasure to have. So I can't wait. Let us know when it's here. And
Okay.
yeah, is there any idea of time frame when it will be out or not yet?
Well, I hope to finish it. I'm giving myself like a
No
couple more
pressure.
months. So
Okay.
yeah, I have it's about like 70% done. So
Yeah, awesome. Is there anything, if we want to wrap this up now, if there's only one message that you would like the audience to take away from this, that you would like to share before we go?
yeah, I mean, I think that the message is that in any tragedy, there are gifts to be found, and you have to look for them. And sometimes looking for them is really hard, but making
Mm,
the commitment to, try to find some of those gifts in the midst of the darkness can be a really powerful tool to not only help others, but help yourself move forward after a devastating loss.
I love this so much, the hidden gifts in adversity.
Mm.
Jason, thank you so much for your time and in particular for opening your heart and giving us insight into your story and to share some hope for others that you can get through this no matter how dark it gets. There's always a light on the end of the tunnel. And I really, I really also want to say this using that phrase that I appreciated so much what you shared about Cindy, that you understood that she just simply could not find that light anymore. And there was no
Mhm.
that it wasn't a trigger for you to be angry at her or mad at her. That to me showed a lot of love as well in that. And that to me is often the hardest part, to let people go when you know you cannot. save them anymore.
Mhm.
That is really a whole other level of love and acceptance that I really admire that you got to that point. I just wanted to highlight that before we go as well. So
Thank you.
thank you so much for being here. And anyone who wants to connect with Jason, we will be sharing the links in the show notes. And if you like what you see, please share, subscribe, and spread the love. Thank you. This is Jason and Marie. Bye for now.